Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Ewald. I serve the Texas Tribune as Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism. Welcome to those joining us in person here in Austin and those joining us online from around the state for our conversation with Uvalde Leader-News owner and publisher Craig Garnett about his new book, Uvalde's Darkest Hour, joined by our interviewer, journalist Tony Plohetski. Uvalde's Darkest Hour, published last week, includes firsthand accounts of the horrific 2022 Robb Elementary shooting and chronicles the journey his newspaper and the Uvalde community have navigated as they've tried to heal, make sense of the incomprehensible, and seek meaningful change on local and state levels. Our program today will run an hour with 45 minutes of moderated conversation and 15 minutes of Q&A. Here in Austin, we have a mic for our audience, and our virtual audience can also submit questions online at texastribune.org/ask. That's texastribune.org/ask, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can today. We will also have a book signing immediately following the program. We are grateful for our friends at First Light Books, opened in September 2023, and First Light Books representative Bradley is joining us for our book signing to follow. We're also grateful for the continued partnership with bookshop.org for hosting the Tribune's online bookstore, featuring books from author conversations like this one, and from the Texas Tribune Festival. Every purchase on bookshop.org supports local independent bookstores. Thank you to all those around the state who make the journalism of the Tribune, including events like this, possible by becoming Texas Tribune members. To learn more and to become a member, visit texastribune.org/support. Now on to today's program. Craig Garnett, owner and publisher of the Uvalde Leader-News since 1989, writes news stories, commentary, and editorials for which he has won numerous awards from the Texas and South Texas Press Associations. In 2023, he received the TPA's Frank W. Mayborn Award for Community Leadership and the University of Kentucky's Tom and Pat Gish Award for Courage, Integrity, and Tenacity in Rural Journalism. Our moderator is Tony Plohetski, investigative reporter for the Austin American-Statesman and senior reporter at KVUE-TV. He was the lead reporter for the Statesman's coverage of the 2022 Uvalde school shooting, and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize Gold Medal for public service. His work on Uvalde for KVUE was honored with a DuPont Columbia Award. I thank both Craig and Tony for joining us this morning and our audience for being here as well. And with that, I turn the program over to Tony.
Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you all for being here and for joining us from across the state. Over the past 2.5 years, I've gotten to know you, Craig, and in many ways have walked with you and alongside you as you and your community and your newspaper have covered the day of the shooting in May 2022 and in the months after. So I know how much pain you have been through in that process, and I know the trauma that you and your community have endured. Given that, I just want to start by asking you, I know that you were keeping a journal through all of this, but I just want to start by asking you, why did you decide to write this book?
Within, I think, 6 weeks of the tragedy, it became clear to me that a journal was not going to be sufficient, and I didn't feel like we could report all of the details that were surfacing in our newspaper. You know, we were writing extensively about, obviously, what happened, but the gravity of it and the amount of information that was piling up, it just seemed like it had to be a more comprehensive document, and that's when I decided to start writing.
Was there a moment, a precise moment or a precise event in the aftermath when you thought this is going to be a book, I've got to do this as a book?
I think maybe the catalyst at that point was the Texas House report in July, and because I think that's what I kind of documented in my journal keeping, that it was overwhelming at that point, and so that launched me on the book.
And one of the things about this book is that clearly there's been so much coverage, so much reporting in the aftermath of the shooting. But at the same time, you do bring, and it really does come through, your own vantage point as the publisher of the local newspaper. Was that a driving force behind this too, that you really, in a way that no one else was equipped to, capture the feeling and the emotion and the facts on the ground?
Yeah, we were obviously in a place of being able to obtain facts on a daily basis, and facts are what we discovered them to be, and sometimes things were changing, particularly with Robb. It seemed like every week some fact would unravel and you'd have to go back to the beginning. But yeah, we were keepers of that in a sense, or at least we were in pursuit of that. And I knew the community, after 40 years, I knew so many people and had wonderful relationships with elected officials and institutional leaders. So I was in a position of being sort of at the heart of the tragedy. And that was the perspective I hoped to bring to the book. Talking with people that I knew on a first name basis and would meet daily, and their reactions, and then of course the families.
I want to just talk about that day that changed your professional life as well as your personal life. You talk about being in your office, which is kind of upstairs, and right there on the downtown square in Uvalde. There was scanner, kind of the crackling of the scanner traffic, and then you heard sirens. Just recount for us, those initial minutes around 11:30 on that morning, 11:30, 11:45.
Well, I think, as I say in the book, the level of noise was so incredible and out of place for anything that we'd ever heard in Uvalde. You could tell by the level of activity on the scanner, and then the sirens that seemed to come from every quadrant of the city as police funneled in. And then the helicopter noises began, and you knew that something extraordinary was happening. And our newsroom was just trying to piece it together. We were clueless as to the magnitude of what had just happened, for up to an hour.
Yeah. How did it become clear?
Our photographer was there at 12, and the event started at 11:30 something, 33. So when he got there, the building was surrounded by police officers and parents who were screaming and calling for the police to go in and intervene in what was apparently some guy with a gun inside the school. I don't think anybody fully understood, who arrived after 11:34 or 5, after most of the shooting stopped, that what had happened. The police knew. They had gotten there within 2 minutes. But the rest of the people, they knew there was danger, and our photographer knew that something had happened because of a domestic shooting that took place on Dia Street just before that incident. So by the time he got back to the newspaper about 1, he said, I asked him, Pete Luna, I said, Pete, what's happening here? And he just said, boss, it's bad. But we didn't have numbers. We knew that children had been shot.
I know that as you navigated that day and the weeks and months and even years beyond that, you were having to grapple with the emotion of it all and the emotional toll of it all, but you were also having to make profoundly important journalistic decisions. Beginning with that day, I want to ask you about some of those images that your photographer captured of the children rushing out of the school, being led out of the school, and your decision to share those images with the national media. How did you make that decision?
Well, he had so many images from that day and some video, and immediately the national press wanted to share those. They wanted them, and we had no way, no skill set that would allow us to come up with some kind of licensing agreement or figure out how we would, parse these things out. So we just said we're going to give 26 of those images to the most established media companies, and that's what we did. The paper we ran on Thursday, our Thursday paper, we had a black front page. And the reason for that is the images of those kids running from the school, we felt like, and my staff really led me in this direction, and I'm grateful for that, that if we ran those images that ended up being so iconic, people in our town whose children didn't live would see those children still alive running away, and that would just compound their pain. So we chose to use just a black page, and some of the other images went inside. And the following Sunday, our front page was a reproduction of every child and the 2 teachers who had died.
Also, that first day and in those early hours, you're making these critical coverage decisions. You are trying to just sort through all of the information and the misinformation. But you also, it becomes clear that one of your lead reporters, Kimberly Rubio, her child is among the victims. So that just added another dimension to what all you were having to go through and lead your organization through that day as well.
That's correct. Yeah, it was hugely traumatic.
How did you do that?
We've done this for so long that you just kind of go into a sort of automatic pilot mode where you just, put one word after the other and keep going. Our managing editor was extremely close, still is, with Kimberly, and knew her intimately and all the children, and she was probably most impacted at that very moment. And she went home and she wept for a long time, a period of hours, and then she came back. And each one of them, the women in that newsroom who were so courageous, they would cry through tears and keep calling, keep writing.
Within the journalism industry and the media profession, after particularly the Sutherland Springs shooting in 2017, there was a lot of conversation about just the sheer volume of reporters and journalists and news outlets that flood a small town. Uvalde, obviously bigger than Sutherland Springs, but still not really equipped to handle this volume of people, and also just a lot of conversations about should there be that many journalists? Does every news outlet need to send a dozen or more people from the national outlets? I'm curious, as sort of the owner of a local newspaper that is so steeped and entrenched in that community, what it was like to see that volume of press show up in a matter of hours on your doorstep.
Well, of course, you've seen it. You've watched it on television for decades through any number of mass shootings and other horrible incidents. But when it presents itself in your town, it's overwhelming. It's just surreal to see how many people can squeeze into a tight space around one point of interview. The intersection in front of Robb was the scene of a number of press conferences where the DPS would get up and report what they knew. And for a block in each direction, there were nothing but reporters and camera crews, and 200 reporters easily. And that was in the opening days. And the television crew trucks with their antennas, it looked like some
tents.
Kind of, the tents, it was insane. But that level didn't hold for too long. Within a matter of days and then a week, and they began to pack up and go.
Was it a benefit in any way at all, do you think?
I think so. There were a number of families that actually gravitated toward that immediacy of being on camera to talk about their child and their level of pain and to advocate for some kind of change in terms of sensible gun laws. The advocacy began in the opening days, and it was about giving voice to their children. We didn't go to the families for days. We just couldn't find a way to be that aggressive, or not, maybe not aggressive, but just to disturb their peace. So these other outlets were doing that, and information was beginning to come from those sources. So that was a benefit.
And then that first week, by the end of that week, the lens had really begun to widen, at least somewhat, on the law enforcement response and the police failures of that day. How did that become clear to you and your reporting team? And then within the community, what was the response to that from your perspective?
One of the families of victims was at the press conference with Governor Abbott, and that first press conference he got, where he said, it could have been much worse. Our guys were there immediately. People tried to get in, and they did. But Jacinto Cáceres was there, the father of Jackie, and he said, a Televisión crew came up to him afterward, and he said, "Is that the way it was? Did those guys go in, all of them go in and try to rescue your daughter?" And he said, "No." He said, that's absolutely BS. And the governor heard of that interaction with the television, so he asked for a private conversation with Javier, also Jacinto Cáceres, and he told the governor, he said, "Your guys failed. This was not the way you described it." So to me, that was sort of the beginning of a documented concept of a police failure to intervene more promptly.
Talk to us, because again, you have a perspective that frankly none of the rest of us do, with regard to how that has played out and the divide that has caused and the ripple effect that has caused in your community that lives on today. The sort of contention that among some that the police did the best they could with the training that they had, with the understanding that they had, versus a population in Uvalde that it was, as described by experts, an epic failure, and that more could have and should have been done more urgently that day and in those terrible minutes.
Well, I think I've said before, the divide, has to do with the fact that so many of the families members and even their relatives were part of law enforcement. And then on the other hand, they had children or relatives who were in the school who may have been injured or maybe been in classrooms separated from that. But so by virtue of those connections, they're torn immediately between support for law enforcement and support for the families that are looking for the justice and truth. And so that's the underlying cause of the divide, is that separation there. We know that police responses to other mass shootings there have been similar delays, even taken longer in some places. Pulse nightclub was 3 hours. We know at Columbine it took several hours. They were fearful of bombs and whatnot, and you can discuss reasons things didn't happen. But at Uvalde, the officers were so close. They were only feet from the classroom, and you had children on the phone. One child, Chloe Torres, for 46 minutes talking to dispatch. "Please come help us." You have a police officer whose wife is a teacher who's called him and said, "I'm shot, I'm dying." You have all of these motivators in place, and you have two classrooms separated by a wall through which the shooter's bullets can pass easily. It's an AR. And that's holding police in check. And then you have this force, and then you have this force, and here's a stalemate. But you can never convince these families and many others who saw what happened and what they went through that police response was adequate.
I want to talk about the Uvalde Leader-News. You have been there since the early '80s and have been the top person since the late 80s. Talk to us about just your staff. How many reporters you had that day and now, and then I just want to talk about the movement of a traditional print publication and how the shooting really spurred you to become, out of necessity in many ways, almost a 24/7 operation.
Yeah, we've been twice a week. We'd been twice a week for 75 years. And on the day of the shooting, the next day, at midnight, we realized that digital was where the news was unfolding. And, we can't wait till Thursday or Sunday to put out a print product that's going to be not relevant to so many. So we immediately began to try to put stuff on our website and to go have a more pronounced digital presence. And that's what we've done since. We had to reduce our publication to once a week for financial reasons, and that is another motivator for us to have a more digital presence. We do all the social media. We do Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. It's just the reality of where we are. So the newspaper business has fundamentally changed, and that happened at least 15 years ago.
And with regard to your coverage, and given the amount of divisiveness in the community, it's almost inevitable that some of that anger and some of that emotion has been channeled in your direction as well. I know you've lost friends in the past 2.5 years as you have led the coverage in the aftermath of the shooting. Talk to me about that. How has that been for you personally?
Well, of course, I'd lost friends before that.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But yeah, I mean, we've had controversial events that we covered, and we did it in a fashion that we thought was justified by what journalism calls for. In this case, it was a new animal. It was more divisive than the national political scene, or what we found ourselves in Texas and many places. So we knew that was going to be the case, but I think you simply have to accept that fact, and maybe as a younger publisher, I might have been less intent on getting more answers. Maybe I'd have tried to be more circumspect. But at the same time, I think what we've done is absolutely required, and it was important. It still is, and we're still pushing for information.
But we've talked about this before. You're in a unique position, whereas, I and other journalists in Austin can go to church or go to HEB without bumping into people who may take objection to our coverage. As a small town publisher, you don't necessarily have that luxury.
You certainly don't.
Yeah.
You don't. I've thought about disguises, but that's too obvious. So, no, Tony, but that's part of community journalism.
It is,
yes. You accept that also early on. And actually, it's what gave me the ability, I think, to be more insightful in writing this book. I mean, I just know this community. People who are born there will tell me to say that I'm an interloper, and I've been there 42 years, but so be it.
I want to talk about where Uvalde is now. Obviously much has happened with regard to multiple reports being released, including earlier this year, the Department of Justice report. There have now been indictments against 2 responding law enforcement officials, including the school district police chief, then school district police chief Pete Arredondo. How would you describe, or is there a broad stroke that describes where Uvalde is and how the community is doing?
I don't think there's a broad or even a tighter way to describe it. Uvalde is many different things. It's a city. It's a poor city. 25% live below the poverty level. There's another group that are hardworking, blue-collar people that go about their business. There are some who are upwardly mobile, folks, Latinos, and all of them. And then there's a sort of a higher class that is other property owners and business owners and things like that. So by definition, there's a segment of Uvalde that doesn't pay attention. I mean, they can't on a daily basis afford the time or the energy to engage themselves in this divide. They've got to live. They got to put food on the table. So that's where we are, with maybe a little more pronounced opinions about what happened that day and how we can get beyond it. There is a segment that simply thinks that every time we publish a story about Robb, that we should be blackballed for continuing the story. It's got to end somewhere. But that shadow is so long that it's going to take, some people have said it's going to be our children's children who figure out how Uvalde actually heals. And then we have the Reverend Mike Marsh at our Episcopal Church has said over and over that his fear, and I love him for this, he's a dear friend, but he said that, my fear is that in Uvalde that we're going to get beyond Robb. But all the other things that we need to address, the poverty, the racism, the classism, the homelessness, the hunger, is going to go wanting still. So, those are that's kind of a seriously deep look at what really should happen.
Do you think that for many in the community, though, I mean, there are these very unique, frankly, prosecutions that have been brought. Do you think that brought or is bringing any kind of measure of a feeling of justice or of accountability? Or are people, to your point, maybe not even tuned into that as much?
I think for some it was a bit of a relief to think that there was some measure of justice in their minds for that day. Particularly Pete Arredondo, who was, meant to be the incident commander. If anybody was going to be indicted, he would be the one. And then his right-hand guy, he was there so soon. But so were the others. And some will say, well, why two? Why not 19 that were in the hallway, And to be clear, in that hallway that day, there were 15 to 19 officers in and out, but the bulk of the officers were outside. They were managing the crowd and taking care of traffic, whatever else. So that was the focus of the families of victims, was the men who were actually in that hallway, who had the ability to, in theory, command.
I want to talk more about your book specifically and your writing process. So you're keeping this journal. I'm just curious about some of the details of that. Is it a handwritten journal? Is it on your computer? Tell me just a little bit about that. Were you literally scribbling things down, or was it more organized or more cohesive?
Mostly it was done on my iPad or my phone, using notes because it's so available and so easy to manipulate. Sometimes I'd scribble something down, but I was just trying to get a placeholder of each day and what happened on that day and the next day. I know I talked to you, I think, on September 27. That's one of the things I had. You had called, and so I just wanted to keep up with daily.
And so for you personally, was it cathartic or painful to push those notes forward into an actual book?
Writing the book was therapeutic, honestly. I could sit down and go through my thought processes about whatever the incidents were that headed that particular chapter in the book, and it's done more or less chronologically. So as I was writing, I was going back through and exploring what I knew and what I'd gotten from other reporting, and that was a helpful process. And I think my wife, bless her heart, she didn't want to read it, but she wanted to encourage me to follow that process.
And you've said unequivocally, this was not done for any other reason but for the people of Uvalde and for the state and, frankly, the nation to have an accounting from your perspective as the publisher of the Uvalde Leader-News.
That was my objective. Still.
As you look at the finished product now, what stands out? What are the moments to you now that you've had the time, and with time often comes perspective? What really stands out to you both that day and in the weeks and months forward?
The crushing trauma for the families of victims and those survivors, and the survivors themselves who were in those 2 classrooms, those children who watched their children, their classmates struggle to live, their teacher, one of them dying in front of their eyes, and waiting, Arnulfo Reyes, the teacher in 111, lying there bleeding, hearing police outside. That is a horrible thing to imagine. And today those children struggle to function. Many of them haven't returned to school yet. They get therapy. They have nightmares. Soldiers go through this and come home with PTSD. These are 10-year-olds. That part lingers with me.
And in the months afterwards, what are in your mind and with the perspective now that you have, what were some of the key moments afterwards?
I talk about it in the book, but I say that the creation of the murals was one of the most uplifting events for most of the community, particularly the families of victims and survivors, to see those children's faces and 20 feet drawings on buildings. And we look at them every day as we go to work. And Lexi's on the building right next to our building, and she's standing there with a beautiful smile on her face. And I think that was a huge turn of events for the community, for healing.
I do want to talk about Kimberly Rubio, Lexi's mom, because she is now back to work and is balancing her duties at the newspaper with her advocacy, which is really on the national stage and continues to be on the national stage. Talk to us about her and what you believe she brings to the Uvalde Leader-News.
Well, she's the most amazing woman, so capable, and she didn't have a college degree when she went to work for us, but she was reading all the time at her desk, and maybe I gave her too much time, but anyway, she was a voracious reader, and you knew that if she read that much, she could write. So we put her in a reporting position, and my gosh, she just grabbed it and ran with it and won lots of state awards for her reporting. But she's such just a lovely person, but you did not imagine that she could show up as this outspoken advocate who is so gathered as a person. And it's because of Lexi. She's channeling this energy, and it's just empowering to see how she's grown. She comes to the office and she does her work, and she's not always happy. Who is? But she's there and she's engaged and she's part of our family, and that's the reason she came back.
Within your staff, how is your staff doing? They've covered from a very front row perspective the shooting itself that day and all of the fallout. How has your staff managed to maintain not only this tremendous volume of work, but pushing through their own trauma as well? It's a very difficult thing to do for such a sustained period of time. And when you talk, by the way, about the national press, they had the ability to leave and go home, or at least go to San Antonio. They were not residents of that community.
Yeah, they have a B team. They have substitutes. We didn't have that.
Yeah.
So, but I think for all of us too, it was in a way the coverage became part of, again, therapy. It was, this is what we have to do. This is important work, and we're doing it together, and we can lift each other up in the process. And so that has been the sort of our go-to, motivation. We did get a Report for America Corps member after a year and 2 months, which was absolute godsend, and I cannot ever thank that entity enough. And the young woman who came in was fantastic, and she began. We gave her the two easiest beats in town. We gave her the school beat and police. So
Yeah, wow.
boom, and she just
No pressure,
no
right?
pressure. She just graduated from the University of Missouri School of Journalism. Brilliant young lady, and she gave us so much oxygen. And I think that that was a turning point for our staff in terms of bolstering our health.
As you were completing your book and getting it into a near final draft, I know that, or my understanding at least, is that initially some of the biggest publishing houses in the nation were contacted about possibly publishing this book, and that I believe you were told at some point that there was not a lot of interest in books on school shootings. Is that how the story? I mean, is that accurate? Is that how the story went?
Yeah, well, of course, if you're writing nonfiction, you're supposed to send out a query ahead of time and say, "This is my project.
Right.
Would
Here's
you
my
support
pitch."
it?"
Yeah.
Here's my pitch. Of course, I did it backwards. I wrote most of the book, and then I began looking and querying, and nobody was interested in it. And I decided that, well, I'll try Texas. I'll try. So Google, Austin literary entities, and I find Falcon Literary Agency here in Austin, a fellow named Mark Falcon. And Mark says, I sent him the query, and I don't know how many chapters I sent him. It was quite a few. And he was in. He said, "This is a story for Texas. This is a story for the nation." He said, "I have children." He said, "This makes me weep. I want it. We're going to find a home."
And you've been very clear that you don't care if you sell one book or 1 million, right?
That's right. I mean, well, I do, because my share of the royalties are going to a Robb Permanent Memorial Fund,
Right.
which, to be clear, does not exist yet. So I'm not funneling money away from it, but it's in the process. It takes time for families to figure out what they want that to look like. It took 10 years at Sandy Hook. It took, I think, 6 at Parkland. It will happen in Uvalde. And I hope it's on the side of the Robb School. That's still a crime scene. Once that's released, then maybe we can, if the families are good with that, then we'll find out.
What is, in your mind, I know we've talked about sort of key moments, but in terms of the biggest overarching takeaway, we talked about, you mentioned the grief of the families, but is there the biggest overarching message that you want a reader to walk away with?
Well, and I think we've talked about this too, and it changed some of the way we do our reporting, is that communities become complacent. We're accustomed to having people run our institutions and be elected officials who may not be qualified, but they're okay people, or we like their personality. I think Uvalde found itself in a place where people who were meant to be leaders could not handle the level of pressure that presented itself in the wake of this shooting. Institutionally, we know the police were not adequately prepared. The school was not prepared. The city was not prepared. The hospital was prepared, thank goodness. And we decided in the aftermath that no longer would we take people's written announcements for public office and run them virtually verbatim. We were going to interview everybody who wanted to hold office from now forward to let the community know what their real qualifications are, and can they be a leader in the midst of this level of tragedy.
Because I did ask you if you were shocked, frankly, by the level of ineptness, for lack of a better word, among different agencies and officials leading those agencies.
I don't think I was shocked. I think I was disappointed, hugely disappointed. But it should not have come as a surprise. And I think I said this, that, I think this is true of every community in the nation, whether it's large or small. You look at who's in office, who's running your institutions. What are their qualifications? Can they really lead, in the midst of this kind of an event.
But it sounds like the prevailing theme and what you really want people to walk away with is a sense of, if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And we need people in the chair who will be prepared and who will know how to respond.
That's exactly right. Yeah, be careful about who you choose to be your leader. You know, it's true in wartime. It's true in a tragedy like this.
As we wind down in our final minutes before we begin opening it up to questions from the audience, I just want to ask, you know, you've been at this for 40 plus years in Uvalde. What does the future hold for you? What does it hold for, you know, this historic publication that did historic work during a terrible time? And what does the future hold for the community of Uvalde? So a three-prong
Yeah,
question.
thanks for that.
Starting with you, I mean, do you think you will continue to lead the Leader-News into its next chapter?
And that's my plan. You know, and before Robb, I think I was probably looking for an exit ramp. But now I'm sort of rejuvenated in a perverse way, maybe. It's certainly bittersweet, but I want to see this paper survive, and there are no guarantees. I mean, papers are folding all around us, but I think it's vital. I mean, local journalism is, if we didn't know it was important before, this is a huge reminder. So I want to do that. The Leader-News, I think, will find a place in the future. It's going to be a different look. Yeah. It's going to be more digital, obviously.
How do you make it sustainable? I mean, it's the same question any newspaper publisher is being asked.
Absolutely.
And trying to find the answer to. Yeah.
You look for a hat to pull a magic rabbit out of it, but because of the Report for America people, they gave us insight into how to do crowdfunding and look for philanthropy. We received a Press Forward Award, which was a huge outcome for us. I mean, they chose 200 papers, media companies across the nation.
Wow.
to divide up $20 million. And we got a share of that for the next 2 years. So I'm definitely going to be on the payroll, looks like. Yeah, and all of our people too. It's going to guarantee that I can keep these reporters in place.
So there's some real sustainability there, at least for the next several years.
Yes.
And then we talked about this earlier, but this sense of it will take a generation or longer before the community can really deeply heal and recover from this. What do you think that will look like, if one can predict, and how will that play out?
You know, I can't answer that, Tony. I can talk to you about, you know, Sandy Hook or Parkland, and, you know, those people will tell you that they're healing, but they're still not. It's still not gone. It's still part of who they are, and but generation after generation, that cloud recedes, and it will be a punctuation mark, an ugly one, but it will be something people have to look up. Maybe, we hope, and not just be tattooed, you know, in Wikipedia.
That there was more to Uvalde before that day, and Uvalde will have a story following.
That historic part of Uvalde, that enchanting natural resource center, the beauty of those hills and those rivers and the people and the culture will be there always. And it will, I think it'll be resurgent as time goes on.
Craig, thank you so much. I think it's now the time to begin opening it up to audience questions, Matt.
Wonderful. And so just a reminder, for those in person, you can gather here at the microphone. Those who have questions online can submit them at texastribune.org/ask. One of the other things I just referenced with a conversation like this, understandably, emotions can be high. I just ask out of respect for us to be able to get to as many questions as possible, that you try to keep your question concise, and so that we can get to as many as possible here. I do want to ask a question that was submitted online as we get started. Shortly after the shooting, Governor Abbott, this is Susan from Alpine asking, shortly after the shooting, Governor Abbott at a press conference promised that the state of Texas would provide therapy for Uvalde survivors and families free of charge. Yet, and this person writes, multiple reports over the months that followed described Uvalde families have to travel and pay for mental health care for children. We know there have been roadblocks. This person asks, was that promise ever fulfilled?
I would say it was largely. We still have resources we're using that came from the state. And, you know, in the chaos that followed, it's hard to assemble a team, especially of therapists. Even today, we struggle to get therapists to Uvalde to do in-person work. That's why there's you know, stuff online, obviously. But I think there was a good faith effort to make that happen.
Jacob Clementich, please excuse my speech impediment, but it's due to a traumatic brain damage. At any rate, do you believe in the Second Amendment still? Because my father was a victim of gun violence, and so was my younger brother. My younger brother is still a police officer.
I'm sorry, did you say your younger brother was killed? Okay, got it. Yeah. Yes, I believe in the Second Amendment. I think it's the way it was written by the founding fathers was vital. That we have people have access to weapons to defend themselves in the event of some kind of a coup or tyranny or rebellion. I think the Second Amendment has been broadened probably a little bit too much, especially when it comes to age to own an AR. The families in Uvalde advocated to change that age from 18 to 21, and we know that would have made a difference in Uvalde. I mean, that came from the legislators, including our own. From Uvalde at the time, they tried to get that bill passed, that this shooter tried repeatedly to get a weapon. He asked his family members and friends to help him, and they didn't until he turned 18, and that's when he purchased those 2 guns and 2,000 rounds of ammunition.
First of all, thank you. My name is Steve Swanson. My question, what specific action steps do you have planned to help the state of Texas with your knowledge, your background, your experience, and most importantly, your compassion, to help them see and cast light on things that they can do, not just with guns, but with how we govern education? The reason I ask is I'm a 30-year volunteer in public education. 25 years ago, I heard on the radio Columbine High School. I visited the memorial. I heard about Uvalde. I feel the pain. And the hope and dream is that kids don't feel that pain, parents don't feel that pain, communities don't feel that pain in the future. And your story and your book, I think, are an instrument for the state of Texas and maybe the nation. Next steps, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Steve, and for your support. You know, we're going to continue to write about issues like sensible gun laws and other things that affect our state. We're a small newspaper. You know, our megaphone is rather small, but we intend to keep pursuing that because there are many, many issues that need a spotlight on them, frankly. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Brenda Alisay. I'm from Georgetown, Texas. And I would like to thank you for being a journalist. Continue your great work. We need great people in journalism and in the news media. So thank you so much. I am a Sandy Hook Promise volunteer, registered volunteer. I'm also a gun reform group leader. So my team has visited our elected officials with petitions, memos, etc., trying to implement or get them to implement some common sense gun reforms with all these mass shootings that have occurred throughout the country. And first question, and I did submit these, I think, online, but the first question is, do you have any tips or advice for how we can meet with our elected officials and get them to really act or take seriously gun reforms? That's the first question, so I'll stick with that. Okay?
Thank you for that question. I think they are accessible if you follow the right channels, and they may listen to you in earnest, or they may dismiss you, saying that they're not interested, which has happened to Kimberly and many of the other advocates at the local, at the state and national level. But that is the path that's open to us. The ballot box is the other obvious path. So beyond that, I'm at a loss.
I'm Suzanne Wallen, and my mother and grandparents were from Uvalde. And kind of like you were saying, I have this perverse obsession now with Robb, but also want to just thank both of you for the incredible reporting and for not giving up on this story. It's so important, not just to Uvalde, but to the country. But my question is actually just asking your commentary. I live here in Austin, and I bring this topic up every once in a while, and I get objective responses. But I went to San Antonio just for, fun. And I found when I was there, and I would bring it up, not the Robb topic, just that I had this connection to Uvalde. And especially with Latino people, I would get this like I had almost slapped them or something. And it occurred to me that the racial component in all of this is so much deeper than what we realize, especially even here in Austin, a progressive city. And I just would like to hear either or both of your commentary on your thoughts of that, the racial aspect of it.
Well, Uvalde's, the school system is about 90% Hispanic. The county or the city is about 75%. So, yeah, you're right. It's a largely Hispanic community. And that plays into what happened at Robb, in the sense, I think, that, Robb was mostly Hispanic, but most of the police officers who responded are Hispanic. Most everybody is Hispanic, many elected officials. So everybody had a part to play. So was there a divide because of the Latino, white mixture? I don't know. Some people have argued that if those children in that classroom had been all Anglo, there would have been a different outcome. I'm not saying that I subscribe to that, but that is a very distinct feeling among some, for sure. And you have to think that maybe that's a possibility, although, again, the officers are largely Hispanic.
I want to ask one more question submitted online, and then we'll have one more question here in person. I'm going to combine a couple things. And I apologize, Craig, if you had discussed this already, but just asking about plans for, is there already a permanent memorial? What and where is it? And then a question about, when will the new school be dedicated? Is there a name set for what that school will be called?
Well, first, the permanent Robb Memorial is still under consideration. The new school, called Legacy Elementary, is going to open the fall of next year. It's largely, it's there, the building is assembled, but a lot more work involved with the interior and the landscaping. It's a beautiful school. It's 2 stories, just in the interior. There will be a tree structure with all glass behind it, and the branches will have the names of each child who died, and the teachers will be part of that tree as a memorial.
We'll have our last question here, and then Craig will have you just close the program after this last question.
Mr. Garrett, thank you so much for coming today, and appreciate the support you provide in Uvalde from your decades of work living and working there. I agree wholeheartedly. Sophie is a rock star. I've been able to work with her since October of 22, when I came on as the executive director of the Uvalde Moving Forward Foundation. As you just mentioned, a new school is being built in Uvalde. There's a mental health campus being built at the Fairplex. In your opinion, given the political, social, economic fabrics that are interwoven within Uvalde, what external supports are still needed for Uvaldians in terms of continuing to work through the trauma from May of 2022, and then just in general supports that people from Texas and across the country can continue to provide for Uvaldians?
Well, thank you for that. I mean, obviously, the funding channels are pretty well, have ceased. So there's not a question of sending money to be distributed to these families. You could figure out some method on your own, perhaps. But outside of that, I think just being engaged, with laws that maybe help prevent something like this again in the future would be wonderful. Thank you.
Craig, thank you so much again for your time and for your insight and for this work. Again, there's a stack of books in the back. You'll be here to sign them for people who may want to pick up a copy. But again, we just so much appreciate your time and your insight and your willingness to distill your entire experience related to the Robb Elementary School shooting and writing in this book.
Thank you for that, Tony, and for your questions. And thanks to the Tribune for being so generous to have me on their program and supporting our work. Appreciate it.
Thanks again.